much for coming out on this Saturday evening to support new and innovative theater in downtown New York. This would be an excellent time to turn off all those cell phones that I see glowing in your faces right now. We certainly don't want to disturb the performers, and this is a show about blind people, so rest assured they will hear you when your phone goes off. We also have a Frigid Audience Favorite Award, so if you like what you see, please visit our website, frigidnewyork.info, and cast your vote. And without much further ado, we are very proud to present The Spectator and the Blind Man. Enjoy!
Hello, and welcome to The Spectator and the Blind Man, stories of seeing and not seeing. We have a wonderful show planned for you this evening, but before we get started, I have one little question for y'all. With a show of applause, how many of you out there have never been to an 18th century storytelling show before? Woo! That's what I suspected. Don't worry. You are in excellent hands. We have 6 experienced storytellers who will emerge from eternity to tell their tales with the benefit of an international translator. Gone are the silly pretensions of the cheap period flicks in which French people speak with French accents to other French people who are also supposedly speaking French. No, we do not do that here. These voices will sound familiar. They, like you and I, reveal themselves through stories, while at the same time remaining more or less blind to the history in which they play. Are we ready to get started?
Yes.
Our first storyteller is a very funny man. He was there at the very beginning at a sideshow spectacle called the Café of the Blind in 1771. Sadly, his name has been lost in the winds of time, as will most of ours. We have, therefore, given him a name. Please, put your hands together for the unknown blind man we call the Cyclops.
When that first fat coin smacked my face, I had to admit the maestro may have been right about this crazy money-making venture. Although that wasn't my first thought. My first thought was, what the hell? My second thought was, shit, where'd it go? I was convinced if the maestro saw me groping around in the dirt for it, he'd be on my ass yelling, get back to your banging and scraping, blind man. What a jerk. He got us to agree to divide the take 50-50, i.e., he would take half, and the 10 of us would split the rest. Now I bet you're thinking, wow, that sounds fair. And that's exactly what we thought too at first. After all, we'd be doing all the hard work, making asses out of ourselves, etc. But here's the thing. It was his place and his idea. I mean, how could we have known you people would be so easily entertained? Note to self. Sighted people have very strange tastes. Also, he got us our costumes and our instruments, such as they were. But he didn't say anything about the coins being flung at our faces. And I really wanted to get my hands on that coin. Deluded myself into thinking it was gold, right? So I decided to do a little recon with my big toe. Now this was a delicate operation considering I was supposed to be playing the fiddle with the stick or whatever it's called. And all the scraping and banging and yelling and clapping made it very difficult to concentrate on the business of my big toe. And I don't want to give you the impression that I'm used to a tranquil or meditative lifestyle. Not at all. After all, I live down with 50 other blind guys at the QV who are constantly bashing around and messing with each other. And although it's not the Paris Madhouse, it sure can get crazy down there. Still, you cannot imagine how fucking loud it was that night at St. Ober's Fair. There must have been 1,000 people there, all going totally nuts. While my big toe was still looking around for my coin, I heard Jock, who was next to me, give a little and I guess that he'd been hit with a coin of his own. And then I realized, holy horse manure, he's crawling around in the dirt for it. So much for dignity. That guy's as dignified as an elephant in a tutu. As dignified as that skinny, syphilitic whore with the oozing boob who calls herself Jubilee. As dignified as the paper spectacles rimming my blind eyes, and the dunce's cap with ass's ears sitting on my head. As dignified as Denny, who suddenly started braying like an ass. Seriously, did he think he was singing? Amazing. And the stupid crowd ate it up. I could sense their attention pull towards him. This is war, I thought, and I made my move. I wagged my head a little and trotted in place like a dancing donkey. And it worked. People banged their tankards and cheered. Encouraged, I wagged more vigorously and trotted with gusto. And, yep, even brayed out some bits of song, too. The coins came fast and furious, too many to count. For a few exhilarating moments, I felt like I'd found my calling. I'd be an entertainer, make a ton of money. Delusions of grandeur, as bad as those of Jacques or Denny, who had been known on more than one occasion to return from a day's begging, convinced that some grand marquis was about to adopt them into his household as some sort of blind pet project. Unlike them, I don't generally indulge in that kind of bullshit, and here's why. Because just when you think there might be something else besides living with a bunch of disgusting blind guys, we're so horny they rub up against anything that breathes and smell like piss and moldy cheese 24/7. Just when you think you might be able to get a taste of some other life, that other life jumps up, smacks you in the forehead, and says, "Get real, blind man. You will never amount to anything." Case in point, the coins were coming high velocity, dropping all around me. Excited and reckless, I bent down to do some sort of jogging, crouchy, spazzing thing, and I slammed my eyeball, such as it was, into the music stand in front of me. The music stands had been set up in front of each of us with the sheets of music facing the spectator. Nice comic touch, huh? But I forgot it was there. Being blind is so fun. Anyway, it really hurt, started gushing, and people laughed. But by then I couldn't keep up the dancing donkey routine anymore. Besides, now all the other guys were dancing too. They realized it was solid gold. The maestro told us later that people had been inspired to dance like drunken maniacs too, and that we should do more of the same the next night. But by then I was feeling pretty shitty, to say the least. I just wanted to get back home to the QV. My mangled eyeball got infected, of course, and for the next 6 weeks I lay on my cot, sure I was dying. Adding to my misery, the guys came back every night from the Cafe of the Blind, as it had been dubbed in our honor, with full pockets, stories of whores throwing themselves at them, and plenty of grandiose ideas about their bright futures. But it was all bullshit. Didn't last more than a month. As soon as the maestro saw the crowds run into it, he asked them to go home. He wouldn't be needing their services anymore. So we sent them back here to live out the rest of their pathetic lives. Our pathetic lives. But at least they got that month. All I got was this stupid empty eye socket. Thank you.
Our next storyteller was also there at the Cafe of the Blind in 1771, but he did not like the sideshow spectacle at all. Not at all. He's just a little too smart for that kind of thing. You know how that is. He will someday be known as the father and the apostle of the blind, because he will someday open up the very first school for the blind in the world. But right now, He's just a man about town. You see him in all the bars and cafes. Please, put your hands together for Valentine Howie!
I was strolling along, idly, as only a young man of 25 can, along the Place de Concorde that fine September evening of 1771, nearly 13 years ago. I was a different man then. I could not imagine failure. I spoke 10 languages. I wrote fluently in 2 more. I could decipher ancient handwriting. I was so proud of how far I had come from myself as a humble country bumpkin. Now I was a city fellow, full of big philosophy. Diderot, Rousseau, Voltaire, they all contributed to my self-satisfaction, their words and ideas swelling my head as if they were my own. Suddenly, I heard a crowd, like the devils in pandemonium, a jeering and cheering from Saint-Ovit's Place, where there is a cafe, sometimes a fair with entertainments, which many still call the Cafe of the Blind. The scene was so startling as to inspire some hack engraver to immortalize it as the grand spectacle extraordinaire. The engraving did not do justice to the frenzied enthusiasm of the spectators, or the pathetic lunacy of the performers. But I could not help but purchase a copy, and it has faced me for 13 years. The spectacle that should have changed my life. The spectacle of 10 blind men, a detachment of the Hospice des Enfants, dressed in asses' ears and dunce caps and great pasteboard spectacles rimming their blank eyes, banging on broken cellos and shouting. You could not call it singing, or to the terrible merriment of the crowd. So grotesque was the scene, and it so took me by surprise, that at first I assumed I must be missing something. Some joke greater than the joke of blind men inept at their music. While there are many things the blind cannot do, music seems least likely. But the generality of mankind is so easily entertained as to find the sight of 10 blind guys banging on broken cellos and violas with as much acumen as their dunce caps would suggest hilarious enough to squander a month's meager wages, throwing back beers and hurling pennies at those blank haunting eyes. The Neanderthals nearly stormed the stage in their ecstatic drunken enthusiasm for the hideous spectacle, for the ludicrous asinine costumes, with a dramatic touch, no, demonic touch, of turning the music stands away from the performers to face the gawking crowd. Ah! The irony, of course, being that I alone amongst the illiterate baboons was capable of translating the black moth that summoned music. I alone saw the mockery as injurious to humanity. I alone grasped the scope of those pasteboard spectacles. I alone sensed the true meaning of the Cafe of the Blind, a sad parody of all that is good and true in this age of enlightenment. Young and confident, I cleverly thought, if the blind beggar can distinguish coins by mere touch, why should he then not be able to discern letters of the alphabet if they were made palpable to him? I made a vow to myself, yes, I would substitute truth for this mockery. I would make the blind read. I would place in their hands volumes they themselves had printed. They would trace the true forms of the letters. They would read their own writing, and I, Valentine Howie, would bring light into their blackness. I also posted a silent threat. Atrocious maligner, whoever thou art, the ears of the ass with which thou wouldst degrade the head of misfortune shall to thine own head be attached. Maestro, I drink to you. Is there no depth to which thou wilt not stoop to make a buck? I also drink to you, barbaric rabble. What low spectacle wilt thou not embrace? How do I make my way in a world inhabited by such people? Well, if I'm being honest with myself, I'm a little better. I'm sometimes given to laziness and disinterest. I'm sometimes given to drink. For now, 13 years have vaulted over me. I've done nothing. 13 years have seen a revolution started and finished in America. Well, I sit on this crackpot idea of giving letters to the blind. But such projects require coin. I'm sadly lacking. For I am but a fly on the bureaucratic ass of the monarchy. A literate drudge with big ideas. I have nothing to offer the world except good spelling. I just got in love with my fellow man. Why did I study orthography? And what demon shoved this philanthropic spirit in me? I should have been born rich. Then there'd be no problem being generous. Well, I blame the philosophes with their grandiose talk of progress and equality. Well, progress and equality are not easily contained. Look, we read in today's edition of the Paris Journal about last night's opening of The Marriage of Figaro, a frothy comedy of love and relations between the social classes. 3 theatergoers were trampled to death. 3 wigged and silken bodies were crushed to death in their eagerness to see a romantic comedy in which the very theatergoers themselves are buggered and diddled by their inadequacies. Figaro reveals to them the folly of hereditary birthright, which can never compare with the ingenuity of the humble clever. Figaro tells his master, "Because you are a great man, you fancy yourself a great genius? Ha! I got the crowd riled up." I sometimes fear that I'm a tiny man, destined to be trampled by giants in this great age of enlightenment. But perhaps I should rather have feared being crushed by a press of other tiny people. As by some bejeweled and ribboned waffle iron. Dear God, what warnings does the terrible tragedy and the comedy which gave it birth presage for the future of France? The theatergoers at Figaro were powdered and tied up in ribbons, but they were no more civilized than the street rabble for all that. The Marriage of Figaro may be a far cry from that sideshow mummery at the Café of the Blind, but the noble gawkers were no less blind to the fact that they were the butts of the jokes, that they were, in fact, laughing at themselves. I'm almost embarrassed by the puffed-up thought that I, like Socrates, speak the lonely truth. Where's my Plato to remember me? I suppose there's nothing to be done but take a cue from the peripatetic school and keep moving, travel onward, lugging this sad body, saddled with this too perceptive mind, dazzled by these too critical eyes, boggled by this too philanthropic heart. But to wear another spectacle? We read on another page of today's journal. The blind Austrian girl, Fräulein von Paradis, was stolen in the heart of Versailles, if indeed it ever had one. She enters Paris, destined to take it by storm. At least it should be an improvement over the usual trite salon offerings of lady composers, singers, and gentlemen poet comedians. Still, to what end or triumph will further my goal of giving letters to the blind, I cannot say. The talents of a single beautiful blind pianist cannot itself cure the illiteracy of all the rest. Yet, devilish desire to see the blind magician, as von Paradis is called, drags me toward my destiny, at which I stare with eyes no less blind than hers.
Storyteller will take us from the streets to the salons. She studied voice and composition with the great Salieri, rival to Mozart. We've all seen Amadeus. She is so lovely and talented that I know you will all fall in love with her directly. Please welcome Maria Theresia von Paradis.
Love is blind, but I had the opposite experience. My lover cured me of my blindness and sickened me with a malady of the heart. My lover was none other than the famous, the infamous Dr. Franz Anton Mesmer, purveyor and peddler of animal magnetism. Here is my story. I was born with a quicksilver personality. When I was 3 years old, I had a fit of hysteria that sent my eyeballs rolling into the back of my head. A literal mind's eye view. Though they were the best in Vienna, the oculist declared that there was nothing they could do for me. Happily, I had a very good memory and musical talent, so Mama and Papa got me the very best tutors to train me in voice and piano. I also learned to recognize raised letters and to find Vienna and Paris and some oceans on maps made especially for me. When the Empress Maria Theresa, for whom I am named, heard me sing, she commanded that I should receive a pension to support my education. Whether it was out of pity or admiration, we will never know. We do not quibble. We simply smiled and accepted the great imperial boon of wealth and privilege. But then, when I turned 18, the great Dr. Mesmer was creating a sensation in Vienna, curing people of all sorts of strange maladies, such as epileptic fits, nervous tics, and stutters. Because some people said that my blindness was hysterical, my parents sent me to Anton's hospital for treatment. I was put into a dark room. They told me it was dark. And every night, Anton would come with his big magnet. Magnets. After 3 weeks, I could detect that there was light seeping through the white cotton bandages that covered my eyes. After another week, the bandages were removed. After 6 weeks, I saw the face of my lover, and that can't be a human face! I cried and covered my eyes. Anton's face was the first I remember seeing, and it was horrible! Funny to say, I preferred the look of my little dog, Puff. So, my blindness was cured. You'd think that everything would be puppies and rose petals, but my cure was so interesting to those minds bent toward understanding that I became a curiosity, a specimen rather than a girl. Even in the eyes of my dear Anton, I appeared to be his brilliant success rather than his darling charmer. That was the first problem, and might have remained my own private sorrow, if not for the second problem. A strange thing happened. Before my cure, I was able to play piano without hardly thinking about it. I could even hold a conversation at the same time. But after my sight was restored, I struggled to concentrate. I could barely play a simple melody. I stared at my fingers and was, dare I say, mesmerized by their movements. I would stare with curious terror and forget what I was doing. Then in dismay, I would look up and be dazzled by the world around me. The objects in our salon became a mad jumble of shapes and colors. The trees outside my window seemed to be reaching into me. More than what I saw, I was confused by what I felt. Anton had a strange power over me. I didn't really care about music anymore. I just wanted to be his wife. And so I stopped music. Suddenly it was the talk of Vienna. The diabolical doctor cured me of my blindness and sickened me with love. Word got back to the Empress, and she commanded my parents stop treatment immediately and take me out of Anton's care. I hid in his secret chamber until Mama and Papa and several servants stormed into the hospital and found me. There was a great confusion. Swords were drawn, ladies swooned. In the end, I do not remember much. They tell me I was seized with convulsive sobs. Mama struck me and I crumpled to the floor. When I awoke, I was back home in my parents' house and was again blind. I was unhappy for many weeks. I sobbed and sobbed. I would not eat or talk. I was young and foolish. But I was not so foolish as to die for love. Gradually, I found my voice and began to sing and play piano again. I emerged from my double loss of love and sight with tragedy dripping off me like honey. Those attracted to melodrama swarmed around me buzzing. My parents did not miss the opportunity to exploit their sweet tooth, and so I began to play in public. At first, it was all sad songs and dark clothes, but gradually the spectators were prepared to see my more joyful side. I was permitted to wear feathers and jewels and dresses and bright-colored silks. Now they call me the blind magician. I have, it seems, usurped my former lover's magnetism. Today I performed at Versailles for the King and Queen of France. They were very kind to me. The Queen spoke German with a French accent, which is funny because many at the court still call her the Austrian. Tomorrow we leave for Paris, where, although everyone tries to keep it a secret from me, I know Anton is. I am ashamed to say I want him to see me and fall in love with me again. It was alarming how fast he fled Vienna after I was blind again. They say he'll be run out of Paris also. He is here now, though, and I feel him. Mama tells me the plan is to open up our house every evening after my concert so that people may visit with me and see how I do things. She says they're very curious to see my composition tablets and see my raised maps and letters. Maybe he too will visit. Perhaps not. In any case, Paris will see me tomorrow and she will love me. Oh, thank you.
I told you you would all love her. So, Valentine Howie was indeed one of those people that went to go visit Maria Theresia von Paradis to see how she did things. And it was finally the kick in the britches he needed to open up his first school for the blind. It flourished in the last years of the reign of Louis XVI and our next guest. Everybody has heard of her, but nobody really knows her. She was born in Austria with the name Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna and arrived in France as the loveliest of all princesses. Please put your hands together for Marie Antoinette.
They called me the Austrian woman because it sounded like the ostrich bitch. The bitch chienne. The French love their puns. But puns are not facts. They merely seem so when they are spouted from the puckered lips of court ladies or enlivened by the engraver's arts. 20 years of libelles illustrating me, their queen, with a distinct anatomy of the ostrich, rutting like a bitch dog in heat, with the portly figure of the king, my husband, wearing his coupled horns, produced a rather unsavory family portrait. A picture is not worth 1,000 words, if what we want from words is truth. But a picture is worth 1,000 pounds in the purses of the printers who allowed scandalous, slanderous, salacious pamphlets to escape their shops like so many evils of Pandora's box. They blasted the eyeballs of my illiterate subjects with thousands of images of me romping in the thickets with Prince Lord or simple gentleman, or lesboing it up in nymphet grottos, or, worst of all, with those indiscreet jewels emerging from my nether regions. That damned diamond necklace affair was our undoing. I thought my innocence would protect me. Innocence unillustrated is worthless. Admittedly, when young, glutted on feathers and jewels. I indulged in elaborate theatrical spectacles and, God forgive me, rather large redecorating projects. What had I to do for when 7 years my darling, waffling, irresolute beast of a husband would not consummate our marriage? We were so inept. For 7 long years I remained childless. When we finally figured it out and started making our royal babies, it was too late. There was already too much anger. Then, in those last years at Versailles, our gaze turned inward, to tend our first prince born so sickly, and to mourn our last princess born to die. We clung to the two that remained to us. We did not see the dangers coming. If I believed in a tormenting rather than a loving God, I might feel France doomed like Sodom and Gomorrah to the fires of hell, whose dreadful years of cold and famine turned the fishwives' knives against us. I gave to the poor, but it was never enough. I am not callous. I never said, let them eat cake. That was some old Spanish princess. Or perhaps she too was a victim of slander? If regret means anything with one's neck on the chopping block, I regret not taking seriously those lies, rumors, and pornography that smoldered and sparked flames in the hearts of my poor people. Now my darling children will have to make their way in a world that despises them. How sad to be a prince or princess these days. Better, much better perhaps to be born blind in this age that seeks to give you light. Oh, you should have seen the little blind children reading from their enormous engraved books. Their sweet voices rival the very birds of Versailles. Their radiant faces cause the gaudy flowers to hang their heads in shame. If only they, whose blade hair hangs above my head, had turned their energy to more philanthropic revolutions. Food for the hungry, letters for the blind. But that was another revolution, and it died with Rousseau. If only we had run away to the New World when we had the chance. We could have bought a farm where my children could roam free. My petit chou could tend his little garden without armed guards patrolling its perimeter. And my Mousseline Sapelez could play shepherdess with her little lamb in blue ribbons and tinkling bells. I can't see my children. With this hood on, I am blind. They have taken everything except my head. Nothing can hurt me now.
Keep it going for Maria. How are we all feeling? We all okay? Everyone's all right? Don't worry. She loses her head every night. In this, the theater we call eternity. Or is it the eternity we call theater? In any case, Marie Antoinette's head was not the only one to roll in the reign of terror that racked France in the last years of the 18th century. One man would rise above the rest to try and recapture France's past glories, and that man is none other than the great Napoleon Bonaparte. But we don't have Napoleon Bonaparte. But we have someone who fought alongside Napoleon Bonaparte, and he invented night writing, which is the precursor to Braille. His stories are full of action and adventure and just a teeny tiny bit of pontificating. Please welcome Captain Charles Barbier de la Serre.
are blind. Not even you have heard of the Battle of Marengo, when the second coalition of Europe amassed against us, and the thunders of their unrelenting onset came rolling in from all the frontiers of France. English fleets swept the channel, throwing ball and shell into every unprotected town, and the Austrians came pouring in like locust legions, while many of we French troops were besieged in God-forsaken Alpine towns, forced to eat our horses and our boots. The great Napoleon was fully conscious of his military genius, and though on behalf of bleeding humanity he had implored peace from those British and Austrian sons of bitches, they, bloodthirsty, refused him. So that he now, with a kind of joy, roused himself to inflict blows upon his multitudinous enemies. One always finds a certain pleasure in doing that which he can do well, especially if the odds are against him. Determined to catch his enemies unaware, Napoleon resolved for us to climb the rugged and apparently inaccessible fastness of the Alps, and descending from the clouds over pathless precipices, to fall with a sweep of the avalanche upon their rear. And though there were spies everywhere, Napoleon completely deceived his foes by ostentatiously announcing the very plan he had intended to carry into operation. Well, the plan was so audacious that the English, pudding heads and Vienna sausages, assumed it was a foolish attempt to divert their attention from the real point of attack. The print shops of London and Vienna made themselves very merry with caricatures of Napoleon's grand army, represented by a small boy wearing his father's clothes, shouldering a musket he could barely lift, and eating a piece of gingerbread. Ha! This derision was just what Napoleon had desired, for his plan was almost impossible, but not quite. Now, young friends, the director of your school tells me that you have learned your geography well. So perhaps you've heard that on the eastern frontiers of France, the majestic ranges of the Alps surge up from vine-clad fields up into the clouds and the region of perpetual ice and snow. The principal path over this enormous ridge runs along the edge of a precipice where, looking down, one may see the eagles soar and scream over the treetops in the abyss below. A false step or a slip upon the ice produces a mangled corpse 1,000 feet down at the base of the mountain. And then, a mighty roar. At God's bidding, the avalanche falls. Blinding storms sweep through those bleak altitudes, so that countless bodies are there sepulchred in snow until the fires of the apocalypse shall consume them. This was the barrier which we were to surmount, with an army of 30,000 and all the bulky machinery of war. But the genius of Napoleon was infused in our hearts. His cheering voice roused us to almost superhuman exertions, despite the dangers and the terrors, and the occasional plunging man or beast. No one deserted. Instead, conscious of our terrible odds, and the carnage into which we were about to plunge, we rushed upon our foes with shouts of enthusiasm. Instantaneously, a storm of grape shot from all the batteries swept through the ranks. I could hear bone crash like glass in a hailstorm. For 9 long hours, the mangled, wasted troops rallied themselves to the charge. And at last, when 6,000 men were strewn dead upon the ground, the Austrian cowards broke and fled. This was the opening of the campaign. It inspired we French, it unnerved the Austrians. The great Napoleon agonized over where the next blow should fall. But that night, there was no way to send word of Napoleon's plan for the next day, or to receive messages from his generals scattered throughout the mountains. Only the briefest scraps of information could be delivered by word of mouth. Real intelligence needs letters. And to read letters, one must light a torch. and to light a torch in those snow-clad mountains was to alert the enemy. Knowing of my particular interest in and genius for cryptography and exotic orthographies, Napoleon asked that I invent him a code by which we might read intelligence in the dark, thereby avoiding such awful moments of blind impotence. Throughout that sleepless night, I sat with my commander and thought how to render a code that would be so stealthy as to be read without disturbing the darkest silence of night. It would be necessary to render the signs palpable to the fingers. And as rosy-fingered dawn stripped away like a barrel of night, I found that a punctiform code would be easiest to distinguish. Just then the enemy, 40,000 strong, with a cavalry of 7,200 cannon, made an impetuous assault. The next 12 hours of carnage would appall the heart of a demon. In the end, more than 20,000 were strewn upon the ground, dead, dying, weltering in gore and every conceivable form of disfiguration. Although victory was ultimately ours, there were many moments of despair when we were all certain the battle had been lost. I dare not tell you, boys, of the crevices and orifices into which this system of mine was stuffed. In the event that I should fall to a bullet or a cannonball, I resolved to keep my ingenious system close to me. Nay, inside of me. Rather than allow such a powerful tool to fall into the hands of those pudding heads and sausages. In the days and years that followed, I held on to this original scrap of invention, which had its usefulness for a time in war, but must now find its place in peace. Napoleon languishes on St. Helena, but he has left his legacy. And if he, a humble Corsican, could with hard work and genius rise through the ranks to become the Emperor of France, nay, of the world, then think what you, little soldiers, could do with my system of sound in relief. It is for this reason that I am here today, to give you this, my night writing. Let it remind you that the dark may offer security as well as calamity. It is good you cannot see the blood that spatters this pamphlet. But though the balls of 1,000 muskets gave rise to this humble code, it shall be washed clean by your innocent fingers and refashioned as a holy gift from myself, Captain Charles Barbier de la Serre, Napoleon Bonaparte, and 20,000 dead souls. Guard it well, use it wisely, fight the good fight. And please never forget that if war has its pageantry and its chivalry, it also has a revolting hideousness and a demonic woe. Bullets respect not beauty. They tear out the eye, they shatter the jaw, they transform the human face, divine, into an aspect upon which one cannot gaze but with horror. He who loves war for its pageantry and its fancied glories is a dupe of folly and of sin. But he who loathes war with an inexpressible loathing and will do everything in his power to avert the horror, but who will nevertheless, in last extremity, with a determined spirit, sacrifice himself and all that is dear to him to promote the well-being of his fellow man, he ever shall receive the homage of the world.
Hoorah!
It is time for our headliner, our main act, our reason for being here this evening. Please welcome Dewey Bale!
I am blind, but even I have been told of David's painting of the death of Marat. Marat was, they say, dotted with painful holes in his skin that oozed. He only found relief in the bath, so that is where he stayed, with his writing table hovering above the surface of the water. He took the names of traitors and added them to his guillotine list. He was stabbed by a girl hoping to stop the madness. But David bathed the scene in a holy light, forever casting the mastermind of the reign of terror, a martyr in the eye of the viewer. It seems the eye may deceive the mind. Now, these school officials would paint me a rebel for daring to teach a system that works better than the one poor Father Howie invented. But would he have stopped the new system if it were better? Of course not. These petty pedants of ours wouldn't know a useful thing if it bumped them in the backs of their heads. Ha! That's the name of the game. Bumps. With bumps, we can read and write. Sighted people have such fragile egos, even Captain Barbier, whose yarns are likely longer and have more strangling power than a python's. Got all prickly on me when I dared to suggest improvements to his system. My God, as if anything man can create can be born perfect. There's always something to be done to fine-tune. Even the most magnificent instruments. Consider the organ at Saint Germain du Pré. For 200 years they said, there can be none better. But then came the organ at Notre Dame. Oh, I'd like to get my hands on that lady someday. Me too! But the point is, with each new great organ built, the air pumps more efficiently, the levers glide more smoothly, and the stops are placed ever more precisely. There is something divine in progress. Perhaps even God is a tinkerer. One could hope for some improvements. Hear me, O Lord, my suggestion for the next version of us. Please make the eyeball a little less delicate. It seems like such an important organ, and yet it is so vulnerable. Or else make us humans less clumsy. Let me sing you my sad story. My father was a saddler. A sad saddler was he. For I, his little boy, would be a saddler too. Sitting at my daddy's bench, I took the awl in hand. The awl missed its mark and found my eye! Well, there's no more music in the story of the infection that spread from one eye to the other, leaving me blind. Happily, my sad parents did not let me fall into helplessness. They encouraged me to study with my brother and sisters, and when they learned of this place, brought me here to be educated with the other blind children. I was so happy. I was told there would be books. And to be fair, there were books. There were 3 books! Each of them a grammar book, a prayer book, and a history history of France way more than I did. They were commissioned by Father Howie way back before the Revolution, when the aristocracy was feeling all panicky and philanthropic. And ever since the fight for liberty and equality seized the soul of France, there has been no money for making blind people books. Not only were Howie's books enormous and expensive, but they were really hard to read. The raised letters were so big that by the time you feel your way to the end of a sentence, you'd have forgotten the beginning. I read them and I reread them, and I couldn't help thinking there must be a better way. Then, when I was 12, Captain Barbier came with his point system that he called night writing or sonography, because the dots and dashes that he poked into heavy paper represented sounds that could be read in the dark. It was an epiphany. The raised dots were so much easier to read than the raised lines, and with a small pointed tool, we could poke out letters of our own. Still, there was room for improvement. The system was very bulky, and if we were to read like sighted people, we would need our own alphabet. For 8 years, I have worked on this system, making it readable, making it easy to learn, making it into something that can be truly useful and life-changing. And what do I get? Grief from Barbier and obstinacy from my professors. Then, today, I had to sit in a room facing 10 pedants who have hardened their hearts against it. Can you imagine 10 men arguing the fate of my invention with more gusto than they would the fate of my head? It was as if my bumpy letters threatened the very existence of writing, as if there haven't been countless ways of representing sound since the beginning of time, as if the Latin script were handed down to Moses with the 10 Commandments. But I am giving that too much credit, for I know as well as anyone that it is not only ignorance, but greed that squashes my invention's chances. There are contracts and handshakes of which I will never be privy. So be it. In the end, we do not need their support. That is, dare I say, the genius of it. We can poke out our letters without books. But some books would be nice! And I am aware that the instrument we use to poke out our letters looks a lot like a little awl. The irony is not lost on me. It is a very clever awl that pokes holes in whatever it is asked. Saddles, harnesses, straps, belts, corsets, hearts, eyes, minds, time. Damn them and their small sights. In the end, I would not trade my blindness for theirs. I shall accept the burden of my prophetic vision, as have so many of my blind brothers before me. You would have laughed to see me point at them in my tribunal and say, "You are all no better than a lot of Oedipuses, and I, like Tiresias, warn you of your mistake, and warn you to step back from your folly." Well, they did not like that at all. Not at all. No matter. They stare at the future with eyes blinder than mine. For I see bump, no bump, bump, no bump, bump, no bump, as a binary code that will link blind technology with that of the sighted in a language so precise as to reveal their Latin characters as chicken scratch. My blind eyes, therefore, are the ultimate all, that burst through time to look to you, spectators of the future, to know